Muy buenos días, bienvenidos a todas y a todos. Ojalá que se encuentran bien.
Good morning and welcome everyone. Hope you are okay in the comfort of your office or home, maybe, connected and ready to start with our day on the Pacific Alliance, which has been called Intersectoral Forum of Sustainability, Environmental Sustainability of the Pacific Alliance for good practices and policies in the extractive sector. My name is Silvan Gaudreau. I'm the regional organizer of this program, and I also belong to the SICAN. I'm going to be, during this forum, the facilitator. Before we're introducing our first authority, let me mention that we have an world icon that will enable you to choose your preferred language. And we have professional translators in the English, French, and Spanish languages. For the ones who might want to listen to the presentations in the original language, you will be able to choose none. and you might go back to change that preference without losing anything of the excellent presentations we have ahead of us.
That require language translation, and we have the privilege to count with us today interpreters. And please go ahead and at the bottom of your screen, you may select the language of your preference. If you manage very well all languages of Spanish, French, or English, you also may select ninguna or select none of the above, so you will have the chance to listen to all presenters in their own original language. Pour ceux d'entre vous qui parlez français, on vous souhaite la bienvenue et je voulais m'assurer.
For all those who speak English or French, excuse me, I wanted to make sure that you can choose at the bottom part of your screen that there is a button, an icon of interpretation, and then you can choose English, French, or Spanish, whichever you prefer. If French is your mother tongue, and if you understand all others, you might want to choose none. That will make sure that you can listen to the interpretation in the original language. Going back to Spanish now, I would like also to invite you to also talk to us through our social networks. We have the hashtag of this event that has been mentioned before in the welcome video. We also have a code that enables us to download the whole program for today with the panel members and where each one of them come from. So, without further ado, I have the privilege of introducing our first authority, our first guest for the official inauguration of our event. Let me introduce Michael Grant, who is the Deputy Assistant Minister for the Americas in the World Affairs Canada. He is a diplomat since 1994. Mr. Grant has performed in Serbia, Turkey, and also responsible or principal in Georgia and Turkmenistan. He has also been in Argentina, Mexico, Libya as an ambassador, and recently as an ambassador and representative of joint efforts for the United Nations in New York. He has also performed in different positions that are related to the Middle East and international security in global affairs on behalf of Canada. The Office of Private Counsel and as a director of international security in the Ministry of National Defense in Canada. So, Mr. Grant, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Bonjour, good morning. Muy buenos días a todas las autoridades, panelistas.
Good morning, all the authorities, participants who are here present.
I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Americas at Global Affairs Canada. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak to you today on the occasion of the Intersectoral Forum on Environmental Sustainability in the Extractive Sector. I would first like to thank Colleges and Institutes Canada for organizing this important forum. It is impressive to read through the agenda and see the caliber and diversity of participants who will be taking part and contributing to the discussions. Gracias a todos los panelistas y autoridades.
Thank you all the panel members and authorities that will be offering presentations, interesting presentations about their experience, work, and policies that they are currently implementing.
Canada's relationship with the Pacific Alliance. Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru are among Canada's closest partners in the hemisphere. We share common objectives and have a long-standing diplomatic relationship. Since its inception in 2011, Canada has been a strong supporter of the Pacific Alliance, and was proud to become the first non-Latin American observer.
Hello.
This year marks the 5th anniversary of the joint declaration between Canada and the Pacific Alliance. It was designed with the goal of deepening our cooperation in 6 areas: natural resource development, education and training, trade facilitation, small and medium-sized enterprises, climate action, and science, technology, and innovation. To support that joint declaration, Canada has invested more than $23 million in cooperation projects. The Pacific Alliance Education for Employment project, implemented by Colleges and Institutes Canada, is an excellent example, focused on improving socioeconomic opportunities for young men and women and bolstering an inclusive and sustainable extractive industry. This project supports 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the Government of Canada's priorities of maintaining the gender equality focus of all of Canada's international assistance investments to address economic, political, and social inequalities, and expanding Canada's support for global education, including for the poorest and most vulnerable. It is also very much aligned with Canada's feminist international assistance policy. The ongoing success of this project would not be possible without the support of the Pacific Alliance. I am very pleased with the collaboration and close cooperation between Colleges and Institutes Canada and the Pacific Alliance Technical Group on Education. I would also like to thank the national coordinators for the support for this project. This forum is an opportunity for valuable multi-stakeholder dialogue to address priority themes of reducing environmental impact, human capital, and sustainable management. The strong lineup of speakers and presenters demonstrates a commitment of stakeholders, including government officials from Pacific Alliance states, along with representatives of trade associations, chambers of commerce, industry, and organizations at the local level working on research and environmental protection initiatives. Together, we can make positive contributions to our country's economic development and long-term prosperity, while ensuring that natural resources are managed equitably with environmental stewardship in mind. Canada believes that securing space for women and youth at the forefront of any development initiative truly creates sustainable, inclusive, and equitable change that benefits all. It is inspiring to see how involved and active colleagues and stakeholders across the Pacific Alliance have been during the last 3 forums on gender, Indigenous issues, and education. I encourage all participants to engage in open dialogue and share lessons learned, personal stories, and forward-looking best practices. Collaborating allows us to strengthen the skills and knowledge of our governments, education sector, private sector, and other key stakeholders, allowing everyone to benefit in the long run. I look forward to hearing and seeing how you continue to engage and apply the tools and information this forum presents so that your countries, governments, and citizens can benefit and thrive. Once again, I extend my sincere thanks to Colleges and Institutes Canada, along with the project team, for putting on this excellent forum, and to all the participants for your contributions. Thank you, merci, muchísimas gracias.
Muy bien. Muchísimas
Excellent.
gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant, for these opening words. I would love now to invite the political authority that comes from Canada, Mrs. Denise Abiat, who from the year 2013 is the Executive Director and CEO of CCAN, the voice of those institutes that are TVET in Canada, and also international leader in education for employment in more than 25 countries. She has worked as Vice Minister, Deputy Minister in policies and programs in social, scientific, economic, and cultural areas, including the development of human resources of Canada, national defense, natural resources of Canada, Indigenous affairs, and Northern Affairs, as well as cultural heritage in Canada, public service, and in the commissions and the stewardship in Canada. She is a former president of the World Federation of TVETs, president of the advising committee of the Institute of Science, Society, and Policy. Denise is also a member of the Committee for Training in International Trade, the Science Center for the Canadian government, and the future endeavors in Canada in these areas. She has received different awards, and she is one of the speakers that is usually called for at a national international level for these subject matters. Denise, the floor is yours.
Merci Sylvain pour ton introduction. Muy buenos días, distinguidas autoridades políticas.
Good morning, all authorities. I would like to thank, first of all, to Edgar Blanco, the Undersecretary of Mining of Chile, Efraín Albanilo, who is the head of the coordination unit for extractive areas or sectors from the government of Mexico, and Mike Grant, who is the Deputy Assistant Minister for the Americas of Global Affairs Canada, for their valuable presence today. Also, would like to thank all the panel members who are experts, and also every participant from Canada, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, and also all those that come from other countries that today are with us. It's a pleasure for me and to welcome all of you into this fourth forum for the Forum on Environmental Sustainability in the Extractive Sector for the Pacific Alliance and Canada. This forum is called Forum on Environmental Sustainability in the Extractive Sector for the Pacific Alliance and Canada, best practices and policies in the extractive sector.
This forum was originally planned to take place in Bogota, Colombia, in person, but because of the pandemic, it was converted into a virtual event, with today being the first webinar of a series of 4 webinar sessions that will unfold over the next 4 weeks. The Pacific Alliance Education for Employment Program is a 7-year program funded by Global Affairs Canada, of which Colleges and Institutes Canada is proud to be the executing agency of. This program has a regional scope, working with the 4 countries of the Pacific Alliance, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, and seeks to improve socio-economic opportunities for women and men in a sustainable and inclusive extractive sector in the Pacific Alliance. This event is the 4th of a series of 5 planned thematic forums for the program that have been organized to address the pressing challenges facing the extractive sector, the mining, oil, and gas sectors. The first 2 forums took place in 2019, and they were both very successful events. The first forum was held in Santiago, Chile, in March 2019, and focused on gender equality in the extractive sector. The second forum which I had the pleasure to personally attend and participate in, focused on indigenous communities, education for employment, and the relationship with the extractive sector. It took place in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada in October 2019. And the program's third forum took place virtually last year, again due to the pandemic, and focused on technical and vocational education and training, best practices, and policies. The objective of all these forums, including this one, is to strengthen regional dialogue between 4 Pacific Alliance countries and Canada, and to share best practices and policies by bringing together representatives from the public and private sectors, as well as civil society. Ce 4e forum intersectoriel sur la durabilité environnementale a été organisé et conçu durant les 6
Once again, this was conceived during the 6 last months by the organizing committee that was built by representatives of the technical groups of the Pacific Alliance, environment, and also the green growth and education. The specialists that are delegates directly from the ministries or departments of national affairs related to those themes. And I would say that water, mines, energy in each one of those countries. And also the representatives of all the national coordination of the Pacific Technical Alliances that are represented by their Ministries of Foreign Affairs, Commerce or Trade and Economy. And also these organizations of Canada, when I would like to recognize and acknowledge them what is the exceptional commitment of the committee members that come from different ministries and countries from the Pacific Alliance, as well as all the other efforts that have taken place to organize these specific areas. And also I would like to share with you that despite the work, the virtual work we are undertaking, the organization of this success or this activity has been taking place together with other institutions, which has helped us make sure that we can certainly work on those current priorities and future priorities also of the Pacific Alliance in terms of sustainability and environment. I would also like to acknowledge and thank in advance all the different panel members that will be with us and will share with us all their knowledge and savoir-faire during these 4 webinars. Today, for this first activity that will be concentrated in the actions and others for the reduction of the ecological footprint, it is very important for us as a CCAN to work on the sustainability and environment, and it's also a priority. The CCAN plays a key role to try to adapt to all those demands of the green economy and training workers for their competencies so that they can have green competencies or ecological competencies that will help us to work on carbon neutral. And at the same time, for the innovation, because of the research that has been applied as well as its collaboration that continues in its ongoing basis with the employers and the activities that you work with. Before we finish, I would like to thank all the participants that have been with us today, that are going to be with us today, from Canada, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, from Peru, of course, and also from other countries as well.
From one another and exchanging with one another on such an important topic. Les deseo un excelente y
I hope you
fructueux.
have an excellent and fruitful forum.
Merci beaucoup, Denise. Muchísimas gracias. Estamos muy agradecidos por lo que mencionaste.
We're very thankful for what you've mentioned about all the activities that and the effects that's deployed by our Canadian Institute College, mixing the applied research with environment, which is very important. Thank you very much for taking the time for doing that and to being with us, Denise. Now we are very proud to have with us one of the political authorities from Chile. He is the Undersecretary Edgar Blanco, who is civil engineer for industries. That's his profession, with a mention in mining and and he has a master's in minerals from the uh, Catholic University of Chile. Before he started this role, Edgar Blanco was working as the intendant of the region of Antofagasta. And before that, he was the Seremi of Public Works in that region as well. During his professional career, he has worked with the small, medium, and large mining companies. The undersecretary has more than 11 years of experience in exploitation of mines, at open pit mines, and underground mines. Mr. Blanco, we would like to welcome you to this seminar. Thank you, Silvan. Good morning. I'd like to start by saying hello to all the participants and to thank you for the invitation to be part of the opening of this intersectoral forum that is done with Canada and the Pacific Alliance. The protection of the environment, which is the key of this forum, is a priority for all the countries in the Pacific Alliance. Just through the reduction of the environmental impact, we can get a true growth and sustainable growth for our territories. In order to stop this climate change, we have to continue with the mining activities. That's what the International Energy Agency has said in the role of mineral-criticals of national transition, where they emphasize that the governments need to take action to guarantee a sustainable supply of the elements that are necessary for the energetic or energy transmission with the vehicles and other essentials to meet the commitments that have been established. But it's also clear that for the best supply against the climate change, we have to have high standards to develop projects without a great environmental impact. Chile, as you know, we have our mining policy and our main goals are for 2050. The main pillar of this policy is the environment that tackles the sustainable mining that is neutral in carbon and improves the use of water in the processes and with the use of non-conventional energy sources. In this forum is very important because it gives us the perspective of others such as Canada, Peru, Colombia, and Mexico that are linked to the mining industry and that they are part of this forum to improve these processes with environmental awareness. In Chile, the goals that we have set up with this policy were developed with the communities, with the mining and the different stakeholders, more than 3,500 people that allowed us to develop the route for our industry. Some of the goals for these coming 20, 30 years is to get carbon neutral, to reduce the water of the continental water that is no more than 5%, to make sure that we have that we are managing the landfills that have been abandoned, and that the source coming from renewable sources for energy. This commitment is for everyone. So as a Ministry of Mining in Chile, we encourage these instances where we can state our views and share our knowledge to move forward to a better future. I'd like to reiterate my my gratitude for this invitation, and I hope that this is a fruitful event for everyone. Dear Undersecretary Edgar Blanco, thank you for your inspiring words and for the backup that your presence gives us to all of us that are meeting here today. I'd like to say that on top of these authorities that we have already mentioned, we also have with us today the national coordinators of the Pacific Alliance, that although they had other meetings, they have taken the time in their calendar to be with us today. And we want to thank them, and we want to also greet them. Now we have our main course with the contribution of 5 experts and leaders in our panel today. That is, it doesn't only addresses the environmental issue as an overview, but also each of the 3 webinars of today, such as the ones that we're going to have the next week and the week after that, we have different topics. And for today, we are going to talk about the actions for the reduction of the environmental impact, actions taken by the extractive industry and also by the governments related to this industry. We are also going to talk about what the institutes of higher education are doing before we serve our delicious next course with our panelists. We have made an effort for these 4 webinars to give you the opportunity to get closer to these panel members by asking questions and trying to find recommendations to implement in a sustainable manner some of the good best practices that are going to be presented. So we have reserved the whole of the 4th webinar for the 18th of November for 2 sessions of subgroup work, smaller, where we are going to have the presence of the same panel members that we have today, and also for the 4th and the 11th of November. And we have also booked time at the end of the sessions today so that each panel can answer some of your questions. Therefore, in the course of the coming 2 hours, we are going to invite you to use the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your screen to write your questions that hopefully are going to be directed to one of the panel members. Our next panel member is going to talk about the subtopic, which is A1, is sustainable management of plastic, regulation, best practices, and public policies. We'd like to welcome Roxana Janet Diaz Vega, who is an independent consultant from the Political Society with experience in circular economy, environmental management, political processes, economic development that is sustainable, and environmental problems in Peru. She is the author of the book, Accelerating the Change to a Circular Economy in Plastic in Lima, Metropolitan Lima and Callao. Also, she is a member of the International Society for Circular Economy and also of the working group using product lifetime extension to advance circular economy in the United Nations Environment Program. Her focus of the presentation is going to be on the stages and the challenges of the transition to circular economy. So welcome, Roxana. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Silvan, for this presentation for the program for education in the Pacific Alliance and the committee that is organizing this forum. And talking about the sustainable management of plastic regulation, best practices, and public policies. My presentation is going to be based on these four documents. In the presentation, you will find the links. The first two are the reports from the United Nations that go deeper and update the information about plastic, information of the previous information for the environment, where Peru and Rwanda have presented a proposal to start the process to the global agreement against the contamination by plastic. All this information is pretty recent, and I hope it's useful for you. I have to start with by saying why to regulate the plastic. You have probably seen this already, but it's important to know that the plastic has been produced a greater scale from the 1950s, where they started with the production. And we can see in this graph how the production of the plastic has increased, and the isotopes are for the plastic, and the the pink is the additives, and this other is the chemical substances. Plastic is a very important material that has several functionalities. It's very durable and it's very multifacetic. But the thing is that when it's fragmented, it generates microplastic that can get to very small um, particles, and they are in the environment. And because of this durability, they remain in the environment and they can go into our digestive system as well. The accumulation of plastic and the permanence of it have turned it into a problem, and that's what we're analyzing to the signature of a global agreement that is binding. The thing is that most of the residues generated by their production are not disposed of properly. In this study, we see that 60% are just put into the environment. And this reality is much more critical in the countries in our region. For example, in Peru, it's just 9% of plastic that is recycled. And remember that I mentioned the chemical substances, right? And the study, or the second report that I mentioned, states that we have identified 3,377 chemical substances potentially related to plastic. 148 of them have been identified as dangerous with different characteristics. So, for example, the endocrine disrupting. What does this mean? And I say this again, we have a growth production, we have a disposal that is inadequate, and also with the chemical substances, and they remain in the environment. And this turns into a big problem for human health and also for the environment. And we need to address it. And there have been several initiatives at different levels. So if we go to a country, we can see what are the actions that they have taken. And I'm going to summarize them according to the interests or interest groups. The consumers or the producers say that they have the responsibility of the consumers and they have to have more education. There are standards that are prohibition or regulation of the products, and that there's promotion of the recycling and also the promotion of biodegradation. And if we concentrate on the latter ones, this study says that recycling is not a solution, and that there are many doubts about the biodegradable products or biological base, because for that you have to have the proper conditions. For example, the composting, industrial composting, but these characteristics are not always present. Because if we go from the creation of the residue to the proper recycling, we have a process of picking up the residues that is not very efficient in these countries. So theoretically, we have some can be biodegradables, but this doesn't happen. And what we end up with having is microplastic that it has a larger presence in these countries. I mentioned this, recycling is one of the actions that is addressed mostly, but there are other additional actions, and these additional actions need to have a focus on the value chain and the different stages from the extraction to the final disposal of these residues. And it needs to be designed with a policy that is based on the evidence and a wide vision and understanding clearly the specificities of the country. On this graph, we can see the design as well, but not in one stage, but in several stages. The repair of the life cycle as well. Recycling is not the answer. In Peru, there was a law that was passed that wanted to migrate the plastic or the traditional use of plastic to reusable or biodegradable, with the exceptions by health are necessary. And so they established the obligation that they had to have a end of life that is going to be valuable and disposed of in landfills. And that is part of all the reports and investigations that I'm mentioning. And it also recognized that there were plastic of single use that were not uh, wanted, that they were not in sync with the management of the of plastic. For example, the plastic ice cream and technopore packaging. So the impact that they have in the economy and the environment is larger than the benefit that they generate in production. The problem of the plastic is not just at national level, but it also happens at regional and international level. So in September of 2021, Rwanda and Peru presented a proposal for resolution to start the process of negotiation intergovernment towards a legally binding agreement, so that all the signatories are going to compromise to these regulations, because not all the countries produce plastic. There's imports and imports of residues and plastic, and they have reduced since 2018, and all that is going to be talked about in March of 2022 in UNIA 5. And what is the proposal for this reduction? Is to reduce the discharge of the plastic in the environment by covering all the stages of the life cycle of plastic and adopting and focus on a circular economy. You probably heard of this. To talk about the circular economy, and it's also people also mix up circular economy and recycling. The principles of circular economy is to conserve and improve the natural capital. That is to say, to design the best way in which this economy is going to keep this and for the longest time possible. This is the design of the common economy, not a product. And then when we have clear where we're going, uh, if we can promote what is reusable instead of what is biodegradable, we are going to optimize our resources. And finally, we're going to enhance the efficiency of the system with the material, not the residues, through the schemes of recycling these products. The challenges for implementing this model of circular economy are difficult, especially considering the failures in the market, because we're not talking about an environmental measure, we're talking about a model. And the first point is to understand what is the circular economy. And I'm sorry for being redundant, but this is we have to establish the baseline and also to have the information and the data so that we can do the tracking or traceability. You are going to be able to review the links that I'm going to leave you in a moment. Finally, the plastic problem is a health problem, and it's environmental problem as well. It's going to be addressed at UNIA 5. And there are certain sectors might think that this is too extreme in the change of fruits and vegetables, but it's a problem that is very important when we have these binding agreements. Is the model of when we are going to lead this, we have to consider that where each stakeholder has a role and a responsibility. In the case of the state, my recommendation is to find a clear path to have a regulatory quality, the capacity strengthening and articulation based on evidence. When the entrepreneurs are not part of this, the ones that are not part of this circular economy, they have to measure the risk and to find their economy and this risk. If the consumer, they need to have They need to make decisions that are aware and informed.
Okay, thank you very much. And I am going to be ready to answer your questions in the following minutes. Thank you very much, Roxana. Congratulations for that excellent presentation and also for being so dynamic about it. Our next presentation is about a subject. Now, it is about management of climate risk as an opportunity to contribute to the sustainability and competitiveness of the entrepreneurial sector. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Diego Alexander Grajales Campos, who is the coordinator of climate change of the Ministry of Mining and Energy of Colombia. He has participated in developing and working on the climatic sector new policies in the energy area, also in the Intersectoral Commission of Climate Change, and also in number 25 session of the Framework United Nations Convention for Climate Change, COP25. And also I think that the coordination of the inclusive plan of climate change, and also the 2050 vision on neutrality of the mining sector in Colombia. So maybe we should state that he's going to phrase this on the solutions from the mining energy sector. Okay? So it's a great pleasure for me, Diego, to yield the floor to your presentation right now.
Muy buenos días a todos, muy buenas tardes.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. Let me introduce myself. My name is Diego Grajales. I'm the coordinator of the Ministry of Energy on the climate risk management. I'm going to talk about the experience we have had on that same matter, climate risk management, as an opportunity to contribute to the sustainability and competitiveness of the sector. I would like to start with a certain context without going into details, maybe. As you might know, today our climate conditions are, of course, quite strict, and we have a goal according to the Paris Covenant, which is, or Paris Agreement, which is not more than 2 centigrades for 2030. But as you might see here in this slide, we are not undertaking the same actions or what the governments have done. We are not meeting those objectives. Today, unfortunately, we are reaching an average temperature of 1.2 centigrades. And this has meant at an international level that we can ask their division and think about this. It's very important to get neutrality and carbon for 2030. And that's exactly what I would like to address right now. The way in which the mining energy sector, of course, from the Colombian point of view, how we are going to face this carbon neutrality. For this end, we need to consider that climate change is not the same for everyone or for every country in the world. Each one of our countries participate differently on the greenhouse effects contribution. So in the case of the Colombian sector, it is quite specific, quite unique, because we should say that only 8 to 10%, sort of, depending on the year, as you can see on the graph, but only 8 to 10% of our emissions in Colombia are part of this sector compared to other countries, because you might have heard about European countries where the extractive sector has around 70% of the emissions in our country. That's not the case for Colombia. The production of these minerals, as well as for other sectors such as energy, is 11.2% as an average. So that means that we are in a different scenario. So the key question here is exactly that one. How would Colombia, with that specific approach, can contribute to the reduction of emissions and also the greenhouse the compliance of neutrality without having an impact on its economy, and also considering its participation in all the climate issues we have ahead of us. From Colombia, we have developed a research or a study where we have identified which might be the different routes or path to reach carbon neutrality. Those are the ones that you can see here on the screen. Many times we might hear people talk about climate change, and it's an irony, sort of, because we feel that they have, like, I don't know what is some kind of way of knowing what's going to happen in the future and making decisions today to make those changes in 30 years or 50 years. We are aware that thinking about the future has or entails certain uncertainties. And that's why we have 5 scenarios to define how this mining or energy sector could reach carbon neutrality. I'm not going to go in details into each one of them, but I'm going to leave, or I would like to have 2 takeaways from this talk. First, that there's no magic formula. It's not a magic bullet for this. You might know, you might be aware that, let me go back a little bit, just to say something between brackets, that carbon neutrality is not reducing emissions to 0%, but it is a zero balance in emissions. This means that I'm going to do 3 key things. The first one is to reduce as much as I can of those emissions, but by technological context or physical nature, I will not be able to do that on greenhouse effect impacts. Of course, there's going to be a gap. And I have to work through that through 2 different routes. The first one is through getting certain emissions and also compensations. I'm going to explain what this is about. So what we can see here is specifically the opportunity that we have in each one of those options that I just mentioned, so that we can cover those emissions for the mining energy sector in Colombia. That is how for Colombia, there's not one single magic route or recipe to reach carbon neutrality. But what we are generating from the government's end is to enable different options so that the sectors, depending on their specificities, will have that carbon neutrality. Now, on that regard, we have worked in the diversification to diversify the electric basket on the non-conventional sources, better use of energy through increasing certain efficiencies, and also many other things, such as, for example, gas greenhouse effects, which is much more powerful, and also the substitution of fossil fuels, the investment of new technologies, which is really important for the future, because it's innovation and development of these new technologies that, as we know, are the ones that capture those innovations, and also everything that is related to the carbon markets. So from that perspective, that's a message. The message is that this is a competitive market and company if they identify all those opportunities. So in Colombia, all of this entails a great investment. More investment, this is more like trying to attract more investment. That's why we are going to invest $43 billion to try to work on those changes. Now, with all that in hand, it's important to highlight that each one of these options for carbon neutrality shows different specific activity. Let me talk about the second option, which is capture and compensation, that since I have already mentioned everything related to reduction. Carbon neutrality demands for new technology, such as, for example, the capture and storage of carbon in technologies that, although today's are not effective from the economic point of view, what is certainly true is that we can see that there is more research, so that by 20 or 25 or up to 30, we can see that they can be implemented in a better manner. And also bioenergy with capture. Once again, if I also translate this for you, what this might mean is solutions in the future. So it is also important because it enables us to work on communities between companies or sectors, different sectors, to try to work on that, the territorial growth, and at the same time to work on the climate change in the territories where we are working at. So from that regard, and as a summary, you can see here that in order for a company to be competitive, they need to identify in risk analysis, which would be among all those different options, which will enable them to reach carbon neutrality. Now, there is something else that I would like to mention, which is climate risk analysis. When companies present certainly projects and they go through this neutrality path, they also need to be aware that these new scenarios on climate change might have an impact on that forecast. We might have drafts, for example, that are more relevant, that might make them bring that or leave that behind. That means that there's also deforestation for a long time, and that also means that we will have to see all those concepts in advance. So it's very important that climate change is not only reduction of emissions, but it's also to be prepared for these new scenarios and also primary adaptation. And finally, before finishing my presentation, I would like to mention which would be the challenges ahead of us. Okay, you can see them here. More investment, more opportunities, generation of new innovation, higher levels of employment, etc. All of that behind neutrality. And other challenges, under my perspective, is to work on a joint effort. It's very important the industry, private, public sectors, etc., work jointly to be able to reach this or commit to this. I would like then to stop here my presentation because of time first. I hope you have a very good day and that is very fruitful, that you get the best out of it. Diego, thank you very much for sharing your experience with us, the experience from Colombia. This is a key subject matter, certainly on the efforts of the extractive sector. Before going to our next guest, I would like to welcome 212 participants that we have connected. That means that we are beyond the 200 goal. That was the amount of people that we wanted to benefit from this event. We understand that we have 500 people who did the enrollment. So you can see that this figure will keep increasing. We will certainly have more people maybe later or maybe in the upcoming events or webinars. I would also like to remind you that you shall not forget to use the Q&A icon in order to write, of course, your questions, which will be served in a minute, right after the presentations. Okay, let's now talk about A3. That's the next subject matter, which is about definition and respect to rural property and also good management of water resources for the mining sector. Okay, so let's also work on, let's try to give a warmest welcome to Mr. Jorge Sangüesa Ursúa, who is the Sustainable Development Manager of the National Corporation of Copper in Chile, CODELCO. He is a journalist specialized in communications, corporate affairs, strategic communications, and media. He also studied and he went through an MBA, and he has a diploma in environmental law. He's also a member of Leaders in Environment for the Queensland University. He has been in this market for more than 20 years, working specifically in the management of management areas of communication, external affairs, sustainability, environment, etc. So he is going to talk about the reduction of the carbon blueprint, as well as the reduction of the water footprint. So that means that we are going to talk about social value, and that is also going to be very interesting. So Jorge, please go ahead.
Hola, ¿cómo están, amigos y amigas?
Hello, dear
saludo
friends.
a todos ustedes y en especial a los organizadores.
Hello, everyone, and thanks to the organizers and the Pacific Alliance to invite us to share our experience as Codelco. My name is Jorge Sangüesa. I am the manager of sustainable development at Codelco, and we're very happy to share our path and what are the challenges that we are seeing in this transformation of mining for the future of Chile. As an introduction, just to tell you that Codelco is the largest producer of copper in the world. We produce 1.7 million tons per year. We represent 13% of the total exports of Chile. And the most relevant is that we have 6% of the copper reserves at world level. Therefore, we still have a long time to continue contributing in this industry. Our operations, we have 3 sites and 7 melting points where in the north of Chile, we have Rodomiro Tomic, Chuquicamata, Ministro Heels, Gabriela Mistral, close to Calama. And then we have Salvador, close to Copiapó. In center south, we have Ventanas Andinas and El Teniente. Today, as Codelco, we are having a transformation in our management. It has to do with the transformation in the way in which we operate our projects and how we do that. We are moving forward to a digital Codelco with a cultural change, very strong cultural change. And that transformation, which is our strategy, sustainability is at the core. And this is something that is very new and very different from what Codelco had been doing in its history. So much so that last year, in December of 2020, we launched publicly these commitments for 2030. And they have to do with these 5 commitments with the sustainable development. First, a smaller carbon footprint. We want to reduce by 70% the emissions of carbon dioxide. Second, a smaller high water footprint and reduce 60% the consumption of water, continental water. And we also have the circular economy, where the main challenge is to recycle our tires and also to reduce by 65% the industrial residues that we generate. Also, a new standard of deposits for the landfills. The 100% of our pools have to incorporate this new standard. And then finally, the development of the territory with social value. And we want to increase 60% the goods and services that are supplied by our local suppliers. Let's move forward. What are we going to do to reduce the water footprint, which is very ambitious, and it has a challenge of economic resources and also in the way that we do things that is very deep. We have 3 leverages here. First is to leverage the waters from the tailings deposits that we have in Teniente, Andina, and Salvador, that they still don't have a recirculation installed. And we're thinking about that recirculation and also to find business model with SUAP and others that are going to allow us to incorporate those waters in our processes, productive processes. These pools are 80 kilometers from the operation. So this is an engineering challenge that is very important, very significant. And the idea is to move forward with this challenge as well. And then the second is the efficiency of the processes. And this has to do with how do we incorporate innovation? How do we do things differently? And how do we incorporate this culture? And I'm going to tell you about the best practices that we want to share with you. And finally, the incorporation of desalinated water. And we're starting with that in the north with a mega desalination plant that is starting its construction now. And I wanted to tell you that we have good news about that because we're moving forward. And we are going to treat this desalinated water. So in 2024, this is going to be supplying the different operations in the north. And with that, we're going to reduce partly our consumption of continental water. And we have moved forward in the construction improvement of the thickeners and concentrators and ministro Gracales, and we're going to do that in the other divisions where we use those types of machineries. Now, we're going to go to the best practices that we wanted to share with you, that we think that this is very relevant, because if we want to move forward with this challenge, that it has increased in its urgency because of the climate change that is upon us, and especially the areas, the Pacific Alliance, where all the countries are very exposed to the climate change, and so we have to work more and more together. The first practice has to do with the division Radomiro in the north of our country, in the desert. We have installed thermofilm in the dynamic lixiviation piles, and the idea is that we have to recover more copper with less water, and so this is a win-win situation in the leaching pads. And we have to find innovation and ways in which we have to do mining differently. And the idea is to win-win. What we did, and we started this last year, with this thermofilm, we managed to heat up and increase the temperature by 5%, and that has allowed us to increase the recovery. And also with the thermofilm, we have to decrease the operation. So we are talking about 5 liters per second, but we can recover more by doing application of this in Gabriela Mistral, which is another division in the north. And so this is a very concrete initiative that has given us a very good result. And the second best practice that I wanted to share with you was in División El Teniente, that they're doing a cooperation advanced analytic for the operation efficient operation of the thickeners of the tailings. The tailings is the main point where you recover water. And what we're doing is that we're incorporating at that point, but also in the rest of the process of concentration, which is most intensive in the water use, to incorporate and use artificial intelligence so that the advanced analytics can help us to forecast the performance, suggest actions, and so that we can have a better continuity, operational continuity in our different lines of operation, but with less consumption of water. And here we are projecting 15 liters per second, and we hope what we're going to increase it in this good practice is also moving to Andina, Salvador, and Chuquicamata. And we hope that these reductions of consumption are going to be even larger. And finally, in Andina division, we have incorporated rheological measurements of tailings online so that we can increase the CP of tailings to the technical limit. What we have achieved here is by having this online information, we can ensure the trustworthiness of the tailings transportation, because we have to put these channels for 80 kilometers, and so that we can operate within the technical limits. And this allows us to decrease the amount of water and use the water that technically is necessary, and so that we can have a stability in that movement, and so that we can reduce the liters per second of consumption. And here we have a 15 liters per second of savings, but we hope that this is going to be projected by increasing this savings, and also the rest of the divisions that also have the same condition, especially Teniente and Salvador. And so this practice has allowed us to involve the operation, which is key for success, and to take innovations and technologies that are available today and add them to our search of doing mining that uses less water in each of its processes. We are going to continue working on this. We're working on deepening this incorporation of innovation in each of the processes that use a lot of water. So we have to sensitize the people in our company, and also to have a collaborative work with other industries, with the industry of the copper itself, with other countries, and the alliances with universities, research centers. That's our challenge. Thank you for this invitation. And just to say that we are all in the same challenge of turning mining for the future of Chile, but also we're talking about of the world that today is exposed to climate change and all the effects that we are seeing throughout the planet. So thank you very much, and we would like to visit our web page and look at the sustainability report and look at these case of study that we are developing in our operations. Dear Jorge, thank you very much for the quality of your presentation and also for the Codelco's commitment in this development of the environmental issue by the extractive industry. Thank you very much. Now we are going to the 2A3 that has to do with the definition and respect of the rights of rural property and good management of the water resources for the extractive sector. We are now going to go to Pierre Cartier, who has a degree and a master in environmental sciences from the Quebec University in Montreal. As a professional researcher in Quebec, at BTB in the Biscayne, he worked in the classification, ecological classification, and the projection of soils, wet soils, from 1996. Mr. Cartier has been teaching in the CEGED, the Abitibi Tiscamen, in the career of silviculture. And he has done several internships in Haiti in characterizing the biodiversity of the plantations of coffee. From 2013, he is the president of the board of the organization of the Basin of Biscayne. In his presentation, he's going to share the success and the challenges of 20 years of experience in managing the conflicts in the management of environmental resources. So, dear Pierre, would like to welcome you.
Esta apresentação é o êxito e desafio.
This presentation is a success and the challenges of the integrated management of water in the region with natural resources. ABTB, Temiscaman, and Quebec. Before the year 2000, there was a conflict for the natural resources and the users of the territory. And then after the year 2000, there is a transition of the survey to the consultation of the region and then the whole province. In 2008, there is a project of the mine Canadian Malartic that starts its surveys with a lot of insatisfaction among the population for this project. And it turns into the example for the future mining projects. Here, we have two examples of the concentration and collective actions of the citizens. The first project of the Oisisco Lake, the Genesis, in the city of Rouen, Noranda. In 2019, the meeting of three people, communication, the arts, and an industrial engineer. They have a reflection about the DNA of the city. It's a city when we have a strong life that is artistic and cultural with a university, a school, and a research center, and a mining industry and services. That is very important.
Okay. Fui la creación de una organización sin fines de lucro.
It is the creation of a nonprofit organization in Oisisco Lake, that's in the heart of the city. This lake was for 40 years the basin that would receive the horn copper foundry, and there's of course metal presence, and also urban contamination such as nitrogen and phosphorus. And there are some other invasive exotic species in that lake. First of all, in February 2020 was its onset. We had 100 participants with different opinions and comments. And then we have another opportunity to try to look for solutions based on prototypes. This is a non-controversial type of debate, and through the creativity of images. It's a prototype, by the way, it's not a final product. Another educational project for young people, such as, for example, the water ecology from the Water Basin Organization of Temiscamingue. Another activity that we can see here is the treasure hunt, and also the circus show. Another project is a pilot one for floating islands in the CTRI, or Industrial Research Technology Center. And in this case, we also have nitrogen and phosphorus in the island. This was done in Scotland, but hopefully we will have it in Royal Noranda soon. The copper foundry in Horn Copper funds and participates in the way of how do we treat passively all the lake bottom slurry. This has been awarded by the popular vote and jury vote of the David Suzuki Foundation in Canada. This is the power of art, education, science, and industrial innovation. The second project is one that is called a domestic well project in the same region of Abitibi, Temiscamingue. That means that 1/3 of the population has it, and high contamination, of course, anthropogenic and natural. Also, they do not know the risks behind those contaminants, and there's a high cost in the lab analysis. Unfortunately, there are 2 organisms of water basins in the region who are accountable for the comprehensive management of water. And they also state that there's a lack of knowledge on the degradation of land and concern for the mining or agricultural and farming activities. That is how the project was born. This is something that was funded by the ministry, part of the cost, and the H2 laboratory is reducing cost of those analyses, helped us to reduce those. As results, there are 449 tests, and 100 of those come from the Malartic Canadian Mining Company, 14 chemical elements and 2 bacteriological elements. 43% are higher than the public health criteria, 26% for manganese, 11% for arsenic, and 20% of bacteriological contamination. And here we have an example of areas that have certain issues with arsenic. In this project, we have participation from the Malartic Canadian Mining Company. They have a follow-up activity committee, and also there's another organization that in Abitibi that asked this basin organization to participate in the regional scenario, in the regional snapshot. Also, the Goldex mine in Val d'Or. There are 17 inhabitants that currently have issues of pumping and quality of water. These dwellers use those funds to study their own domestic well, and this organization of Abitibi Basin is helping us on the neutral guidance for all those inhabitants. The first conclusion: success and challenges. Well, the first of those successes is the projects try to prioritize the important of the largest ones. The participant feels that they are participating, they are one of the stakeholders in that change, and also it's feasible because it's technically and financially possible or feasible. And also looking ahead or looking forward, that is the continuous improvement. Most important point, and also to try to take a closer look at monitoring. The second conclusion, as part of those challenges, once again, is the human aspect. Once again, when we have art and creativity, and when we add it to that fund, of course, we have this this special type of animation that helps us a lot to broadcast or disseminate the idea. Also, the neutral guides that are working as enablers. There are positive leaders, especially women, that are present in terms of the natural resources usage. Also, we should try to avoid as challenges of the negative or extremist leaders, slow innovation with some government organizations. And we can also find creative stakeholders, and we have to try to help them to go beyond and think about off the box, maybe out of the box, and also within the regulations. Thank you for your attention.
Muy bien, muchísimas gracias, estimado Pierre, por esta presentación. Ahora,
thank you very much, Pierre, for this presentation. We would like now to go to A4. A4 is about planning of investments and activities for the ecological print reduction. So once again, Rodrigo Murillo Fernandez is welcome to talk about this subject matter. He is he's the deputy manager of dams security that is called or known as CONAGUA. He is a consultant in waterworks within the Institute of Water Technology in Mexico. He has experience in geotechnical design, construction, and quality control of waterworks, as well as water treatment plants, also protection and water supply works. He has worked and he has been part of the technical standards definition for dams and reservoirs. And he was also one of the reviewers for the environmental standard and P51 on those specific points. He is going to talk about the technical design of those dams in the mining industry. So, Rodrigo, welcome. Good morning. National Commission of Water has among its attributions the stewardship of national heritage in rivers and other national property flows. The water bodies, that's why they have to measure, assess, analyze, and surveil the amount and quality of waters, as well as the evolution, diagnosis, and forecast. Among those attributions, we also have the construction permits, and also the occupation of flows in federal areas to carry out, to try to build structures such as water dams and mining dams, as well as the water entitlements and the discharge permits for the receiving bodies and follow-up. They are also responsible or accountable to survey that these works and use of water do not have any unfavorable effects on the population and environments. We can see that this is also within the 27th article of the Constitution in the Act of National Waters, in the CONAGUA Directorate standards, as well as other decrees, among which we have the 141st standard, as well as NMX AA 175 for the dam safe operation. We can say that the use and extraction, as well as the use of other things such as water bodies and flows, are based in the stewardship of water by hydrological basins and water bodies. Before 2004, we had those permits only through the hydrological analysis of the effects of these water basins, but afterwards we discovered that we had worked not only in the hydrological areas, but also in the structural point. That's why we had to show that they are stable during construction, operation, and commissioning, or out of commissioning. CONAGUA has more than 6,533 dams. Only 42 out of those 511 are active and inactive, and of those that have on the environment area. When we have these follow-ups, we see that there are some others, such as, for example, on the environmental areas, as well as with the opinion of CONAGUA through the ones that can have on the water quality on rivers and water bodies through an analysis in the performance. Now, specifically, this type of dams represent certain conditions that would work on these specific areas because they are exposed to some other things, such as, for example, deformations, cracking, etc. And also, as well as some others that are also part of this withdrawal type of dams. Some of these water bodies would increase issues such as, for example, danger in both sides with modern methodology. It is key for us to understand that it has to be fostered. These activities are usually with lots of benefits for the region where we have them, such as, for example, local direct or indirect employment. One of the key concerns of the environmental sector is also the environment issues that we might have because of the environmental passive issues on abandonment that represent an important environmental damage to Jaltipan, Tesistepec, and Veracruz, in two facilities that were seen unaccountable with anyone who will be held unaccountable, and also through that permits to try to remediate 13 minor deposits of hydrocarbons with sulfur, as well as 2 glasses with acid water and hydrocarbons. Unfortunately, we could that remediation through the confinement technology. We also have to review an update of standard number 141 for these withdrawals to try to see, among other aspects, the risk analysis of these mining deposits from the hydrological point of view, as well as the stabilities on the future areas. And also to try to avoid then the areas within the difficult passive and that are difficult or expensive to try to remediate. Because of the standards, there are different organizations that participate in these activities, and that's why we have these national withdrawal deposits on the participation of the mining industry, Semarnat, Conagua, INE, and Profepa. As we have already mentioned, Conagua undertakes the regular review on those dams with federal flows and intervenes when we have some contingencies because of spillouts that might have an impact on shallow waters or underground waters in coordination with other sectors such as the civil protection and local governments.
En la parte estructural, actualmente se verifica que el comportamiento
On the top
sísmico
part, we can see that the seismic performance of the works allows us to guarantee the stability through the reviews of the structural conditions with technologies as modeling through the finite elements. Obviously, to achieve this, we have to have broad studies such as the characterizations of the size of the tailings that are going to be placed and the evolution and the effects that they can have in the environment, particularly in the quality of the water. Currently, they use all the modern tools for characterization and modeling of the cementation and the deposits under different stages of constructions until the closing. Since 2013, they're trying to review this standard 141, which was restarted in 2020, where they pretend to incorporate the current concepts of safety of the tailings dams according to the criteria of different international organizations, such as the International Commission for Large Dams and the standard of a global standard for management of for handling of tailings, and the CONAGUA promoted from 2015 to 2017 the elaboration of 3 standards: the classification analysis of risk, the inspections of safety, and the elaboration of standards for services in front of emergencies. This standard applies the risk analysis on dams and is the requirement of the for granting of permissions of these works. With the application of this technology, is it possible to look at the affectation zones and the probability that this can happen under different scenarios. To clarify the possible causes and consequences of the eventualities that can happen, which is simpler to pay attention to the conditions that can cause a spill of water, acid water, or tailings. On the other part, it provides the citizenship information about the dangers to which they might be exposed, and it also has a direct way for the elaboration of the standards for plans of attention in front of emergencies, which are key for the dams. It's evident that the managing or the handling of the mining dams should be done in this way. And this benefit is not just for society, but also for the extractive industry that needs to prioritize the actions and investments that need to undertake to avoid contingencies that force to suspend operations and reduce the cost of possible indemnizations and remediation. It's worth mentioning that several companies have already a new vision, and they have applied special measurements for prevention. For example, the contingency dam in Cananea to reduce the possibility of spills that are going to affect the rivers that depend on this dam for their supply of their sources. In other cases, they have considered the adequate measures to avoid the superficial waters enter into the tailings deposit and cause situations of danger. Through the application of good practices, the exchange of information and experiences, and as well as the coordination between the mining industry, the technical associations, and the environment, aiming at ensuring that the deposits of tailings and acid water are stable during their start, life service, and closure, and so that they can be free of threats in the mining sector and a sustainable condition for the population and biosystems in the areas where the mining is a motor for the environment. Finally, I want to say that the use of the current technologies allows us to have a proper analysis of the response to these types of dams and the conditions that they're going to be subject during and after their operation. Through the risk analysis, it's possible to clarify the main threats that a work would be exposed to, and to emphasize the attention to these structural variables and non-structural variables that depend on their safety, which can allow to reduce the social environmental risk. The update of the standards on mining works is necessary for the benefit of the society, industry, and the environment to ensure a sustainable future and with less risk for everybody. Thank you, everyone, for your attention. Thank you very much, dear Rodrigo. As always, your presentation was very relevant and very well managed in terms of the time. Now we are going to go to the Q&A. Always when we have an international event like this, it's bad when we cannot have an interaction or an exchange with the participants that are attending these types of events. So now we have 213 people connected. And the questions that have been shared in this blog have already been answered in the Q&A chat. Since we don't have a lot of time, but we have about 45 minutes just to tell you about the questions. I'm going to give the opportunity to the members of our panel to complement their presentation or to comment about the other presentations with our other guests.
Entonces,
So let's start with our dear Roxana Janet Diaz Vega from Peru. Roxana, could you please turn your camera on and your microphone, and we can start with you. Thank you very much, Silvan. Congratulations, everyone, to all the panel members, and thank you for the invitation. Within the Q&A that the attendees asked, there's one that I answered in the chat. I'd like to also mention it here. They were asking about whether if recycling is not an option, how do they have to proceed with managing plastic? And Unfortunately, there isn't a single answer for that because it's going to depend on the people of the value chain that they, or in where they are in the value chain. If we're talking about, if we're talking at a global level, the answer needs to be systemic. It- the contamination by plastic from different sources, and so it has impacts in different media. So everything containing plastic is going to generate microplastic because it's the degradation, natural degradation process. Everything that is has plastic is going to generate microplastics, everything. So it's part of the process of degradation of this material. And therefore, it requires an analysis of how this is managed and how this needs to be redesigned. And so the solution could, the, we could think that the, the production of the material is not the issue. If they have if plastic has certain functionalities, but the single-use materials are a big challenge because they are just inconsistent because they have such a durable material, and they are very short use, but they remain for a long time as microplastic. But other materials are for example, the pipes that have a good use of this durability or a single use and or medical as well. So the issue is in doing a critical analysis based on the reality at the spatial level that we are analyzing with objective information that when the benefit generated by this material is greater than the impact generated by it. So that's why we don't talk about a prohibition, a full prohibition of plastic, but we talk about a transition to new economy of plastic. That's why the answer is not simple. If we're talking about user or consumers every day, we should think about reduction. And then I want to clarify about that with the council or what the advice that is given to the companies. So identifying what is not in sync with this new economy of plastic. And so traditionally, if they're traditional risky, they have to identify it as high, and maybe they're not going to have a future in the trends, in the trends of this market. Therefore, as part of this risk analysis, they can identify the opportunities to migrate to other types of products or to migrate to services, other services, or maybe to start using renewable sources like the bioplastic. But all this is not isolated because circular economy is the proposal that establishes for ONEA 5, the circular economy says that besides trying to keep the value as long as possible, it has a systemic and collaborative approach. That means that by applying this systemic approach, we have to have a system, and the analysis it needs to consider those characteristics of the system because with few isolated measures and the effect that it can have in the interrelation can be even more complex, and we can increase the problem rather than having a solution. That is what could be happening with the plastics that are called biodegradable, that if they don't have a means to be degraded properly, they're going to end up being a problem the same as the conventional plastic, and their degradation is faster and is invested, and we invest more resources and energy in the production. Unfortunately, there isn't a simple solution. We have to analyze this for each case. And in the last question, they asked me how was the participation in the problem of the microplastic, and I understood that it was the citizens' participation in Peru. And we tried to do a process that was participative, and we tried to incorporate the industry and working with them in the commercialization and production in the labs that it's very important, but there are a series of improvements related to the formation of abilities so that we can communicate what is the problem, and so that the state can also communicate clearly what is the idea of where they're going to manage the plastic in the future, so that the industry have a clear message and they can transition their production models to that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Roxana, and please stay with us. Maybe we're going to have the opportunity to come back to you with more questions. Thank you very much for this clarification. Now we are going to go to Diego Alexander Grajales Campos from Colombia, who maybe he can clarify a bit more about the questions. Please, Diego, go ahead with your camera and your mic. Hi, everyone, again, and thank you very much for the participation. It's very important to spend time with you. Two questions that were asked, and I think that maybe we can go deeper into them. The first is about the type of the sources of renewable energies can be used in the mines. And the truth is that I'm going to give you my answer is that it depends. It depends on the characteristics of the operations of the mine, and it depends on the location. And what we have heard so far as experience of the national companies or international companies, the one that that we use most is an operations for renewable energies, a small machines that can supply can be supplied from these sources, but the internal activity within the mines for the reduction of emissions is in transportation by changing the vehicles and using fuels such as gas or other fuels, and other small changes in the fleet by electrical vehicles that this is not it's not a huge evolution, but it's working that way. In terms of the capture, the truth is that so far we are enabling the standards for investing in these types of processes, what type of technologies there are in the carbon storage. It consists in 3 stages, and they have a planning and characteristics. They capture basically is in broad terms is a machine that allows us to capture those emissions that are generated by this activity specifically, and that to start. And there are other types of strategies that are the capture of carbon as well, where what it's done is that through a process, a continuous process for reforestation and the use of the biomass to reuse the energy, there is a zero balance of the emissions, and then we do the capture as such. And this is done for the emissions. This, as the questions that I was asked, I'd like to give you as the main message. The climate change has 2 phases. One, to reduce emissions, but for the developing countries, which is such as the case in Latin America, the particularity is that we have to make larger efforts, and we have to do it with the particularities of each of the cases. Along those lines, what is important is to enhance or consider that there is not a magical formula, but what it is expected is to generate opportunities depending on the characteristics of the countries and the processes that so that we can get to carbon neutrality. It is not a concrete reduction of the emissions, but it's a balance between what I can what are going to be my emissions and what I can compensate in other aspects. but the reduction of emissions is very significant, but you have to aim at that and then to compensate and capture. And then the other area is the climate risk and the transition, or the materialization of the climate variables that can affect our operation. And it's not just the operation, but also the market issues. So the climate variability can increase the prices of energy and the prices of production, and make more difficult the work of the employees, and that is going to have an impact on prices in the end. And then just to end, the message is that the climate change is much more complex and more crossover than just the reduction of the emissions. It has to do with competitivity and a lot of other variables. And so we can contribute to that reduction of the problem. And so that is just broadly what I wanted to mention. Thank you very much, Diego. And now we're going to go to the next panel member. Jorge, are you ready? Are you with us? Maybe Pierre or Rodrigo?
Sí, estoy aquí.
I'm here, says Pierre, from your Canadian point of view.
Si je pourrais, j'interviendrai en français.
Oui, oui, oui. Tu peux y aller en français. Por favor, todos los demás, asegúrense de haber seleccionado.
Please, everybody, make sure that you select in the button for interpretation on your screen, select your language so that you can hear Pierre in your favorite language. Thank you very much.
Je vais répondre tantôt à une des questions qu'il y a eu dans Q&R.
I'm going to respond all the questions, the Q&A for the social impact of the region of Pistamac. It would be interesting to think that in Quebec, there are 40 organizations in the basins. In Quebec, there are 40 tables of concentration where the mining industry is involved in different groups and different interests, and they have reflected in solutions about the management of water and all the different commitments about water. This way of working on this enables us to ensure the work team and to have different groups together. There is an autochthonous community or indigenous community that they want to rehabilitate a fish in the region, and the company says, no, we want to participate with the funding, but you can use the lab. But this type of activities allows to work on the concentration of water, but there is a history for the consult. People come and ask the communities and the groups about their projects. There is a transition of projects, mining projects, continuous projects, to ask people as well, but there is a movement as well that is going to work for the regional concentration. And that allows to look at all the teams. And I worked with the forestry industry for 20 years and 10 years with the mining industry. And the impact from the forestry industry is in a large part of the territory. So the impact of the mining industry is much more important, and it's going to be in a territory that is smaller. So it's interesting to be able, and I've been lucky to compare both industries, and the mining industry evolves very quickly in social terms and also in terms of communications. But there's still some things that the small dimensions that are very strong technically, But from the point of view of the communication, social communication, they are less strong in that. And so that would be the message that I would like to say. Thank you, Silvana. Thank you for the participation and the invitation.
Estas aclaraciones son importantes.
These clarifications are important because we believe that from that event, from this event, we just don't get the nice presentation or information that has been processed, but we want to get to incentivize and the improvement or the implementation of some of these best practices. We know very well that best practices in a given country cannot be deployed in the same way in another country. So in another productive tissue, that because of the cultural characteristics or economic characteristics cannot be implemented in a successful way. Nevertheless, with the panel members that we have today, to have the opportunity to ground the how to apply and how to implement these best practices is very relevant. And we have to do this in a very grounded way, to talk about the challenges, to talk about the problems that maybe are known by you, my dear experts. And with that period of exchange with the participants in this forum to talk about more about these challenges and these recommendations. Through this forum, we want to enhance dialogue or promote dialogue. We want to increase your network so that after this forum, you can continue with an exchange in a network, so that you can continue feeling that you have support from other experts, from not just from your country, but from other countries that have met today and they're going to be meeting in the coming weeks. Thank you very much, Pierre. And now I'd like to invite our next panel member, Jorge Sangüesa Ursúa from Chile, and to share some observations for these questions. So, Jorge?
Thank you very much. I am going to talk about certain points that I think that which are the priority actions in order to reduce our climate risks. I should say that the extractive industry in general, well, in my case in Codelco, it is quite important to see what mitigation is. We are certainly reducing the greenhouse effects at a maximum level. Today, as Codelco, we have a 70% goal for year 2030, and carbon neutrality 2050 or earlier. That, of course, will depend on other things, such as, for example, on what we are working right now. But for the risks themselves, on the impact of climate change, I think that the main action would be on water, on the way in which not only every company can get supply in a sustainable manner, but also in the way in which we work with the stakeholders and everyone who is related to that, so that we can make our activities sustainable. So mining, in Chile at least, has done great commitments to try to work into reducing continental waters. It means that also working on the operations and also moving forward towards zero consumption of the continental waters, substituted by seawater, desal, of course, seawater. And that is why we have already built and we have already projects that enable us not to make it even more difficult, the drought and water scarcity situation where we are at. so as to implement solutions that would help us to have our consumption sort of standalone from the situation of the area. But that's not the end of the story, because if we have water, we are fine, but the rest of it is still complicated. They are not self-sustainable. We have kept working. That's the reason why we have kept working with other stakeholders in solutions, pathways, and development of project engineering projects that will help us not only as just one another holder, or maybe even the main stakeholder, but to try to look at it from the technical point of view, to see how to face these effects of climate change that also is dramatic, and also on those next years. That's why we have this way in which we can all collaborate to work on situations that might help us, that in our territory we can face this phenomenon as complex as climate change and all those effects. So that's why we're working on that. That's all I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Muy bien, querido Jorge, muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Jorge. Thank you for your words. Before moving to our next panel member, I would like also to answer a question that is kind of more technical or operational, maybe, that has been shared in the module of questions that is related to what you will be receiving, or the way in which you can have these presentations available afterwards, of course. So I would like to confirm that we will have all this available in our YouTube channel as an audiovisual document. And since you are part of this event, we will be able to send those PPTs as you're enrolled in the event, I mean, and we will afterwards send a report of the forum that we will summarize all the good practices or best practices, and will also enable us to have written all the conclusions that will be developed not only in the webinar today, but also in the upcoming weeks with the last webinar in teamwork, in team groups. So we would like to mention that because all of these products or elements will be ready and sent to each one of you. I would like now to invite Rodrigo Murillo Fernandez from Mexico. I would like him to turn off his camera and microphone to get the best out of the time that we have with certain observations. Thank you. We have had certain events, as you know, such as the spill of acid water many years ago. And there was, of course, a great deal of damage there. And as I said it before during my speech, those deposits in Veracruz and other cities is something that has to be solved, of course, or sorted out by the authorities, because companies went bankruptcy, they just disappeared, and then we can see this void that someone else has to sort it out. So one of our main concerns is exactly that we don't have things such what happened in Sonora or what happened in Pulmarin, for example, more than a year ago. That means or represents high levels of contamination and, of course, huge impact in all of the services, economy, both, etc. So we have been concentrated or devoted into this type of the security, and I said before, hydraulic and water safety. But the structural safety or security is also important, because if we can see that there is a mass of tailings or acid spill out, of course, the spillage, this means that it's not only impacting the population, as we know, but the same industry is going to suffer. So it's always better to prevent and remediate. So we have asked a formal analysis or a risk analysis to see where we can work on that preventively. and that we don't have incidents or accidents. That's the best scenario, case scenario, of course. Now, the tailings deposits will be there for a while after closure. So we need to make sure that they are stable, that we don't have contamination or spillages in waters that are for the consumption of our population, rural population, specifically in those areas. Some of them come from that consumption comes from rivers, but many others come from wells as well. So we have to be very careful because there might be some actions. And when we ask ourselves in the chat, and what is the serious analysis and we have on the surveillance or supervision? And that's all safety. Also the industrial safety. And also the mining officers know about that. And that means that local issues or acid waters, we will apply this technology to make sure that they will not have further issues. Thank you.
Señor Rodrigo, muchísimas gracias.
Rodrigo, thank you very much for this interesting points. We will now have time for another round of questions.
Les invito, si tienen
So once again, if there is something that you need to add, we still have some time left or available.
De parte de los panelistas podrían también.
So the panel members, you might also have questions amongst yourselves if you feel comfortable in asking those questions verbally, openly. Our environmental expert, Israel Avila from SICAN. If you also have some comments, go ahead, please.
Vemos que hay varias preguntas abajo.
We can see that there are many questions here.
Adelante.
Go ahead.
Muy bien. Brigitte, Israel.
Brigitte, Israel, questions. I don't know if you have any questions. Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, Sylvain. For the panel members, it would be great to consider questions that we have. A question that we have here. The question is about pointing at certain recommendations or suggestions that they might think that are core for a good implementation or risk management of the policies that are related to the points that you have mentioned, and that should be considered by the Pacific Alliance countries. So I would like to invite then our friends, our panel members, on that based on the presentation, excellent presentations you have given us, to also consider which would be then those recommendations that might be shared with the rest of the participants, so as to have a good implementation of all the different practices or policies or guidelines that you have shared today. May I please invite one of the participants, the panel members, that they can dive into recommendations for the implementation today. Thank you.
Gracias, Brigitte. También pidiendo a nuestro equipo técnico de poder rehabilitar el micrófono.
Yes, could you please enable our friend Israel as an environmental expert? He also has, he's also interested into participating.
Quiero también aprovechar
I would also like to use these minutes we have left to remind you that our program, Education for Employment for the Pacific Alliance, is looking for working with Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru, and with our different Canadian experts sharing our lessons learned at an institute level, at a pedagogical level, also the companies and applied research. And as we have seen with our president, research means applied research is also giving us a pathway for the environmental areas. So we know that many of you who are here today come from institutes, right? So the environmental points could be included as part of our curriculum, but it could be in the institutional management and also in applied technology, and to see that hand in hand. And it's much more relevant with these extractive companies are small or medium sized, and also that we can relate those activities, institutes through the environmental concerns. That is something that I think is interesting for you to know and for us to share. It is not only working on the minister, but also what is the local sectors and also technical people. Okay.
Otras palabras de panelistas que quieren sumarse o del
So any other panel members or people from SICAN who'd like to mention something before going to our next talks? Yes, Israel, please go ahead. Introduce yourself if possible. Good morning, my name is Israel Avila, environmental consultant for SICAN in the EPAP Pacific Alliance program. Okay, I wanted to congratulate every member, every participant, because these have been very good practices and experiences, shared experiences in terms of their presentations. And I would like to invite you to, if you have any other questions, please feel free to mention those topics. It has been very relevant in terms of environmental sustainability. And especially when we want to talk about this experience and how these actions could reduce the footprint, environmental impact, destructive segments. And these are points, areas that, as Sylvain was saying, in the extractive actions as well as in the exchange of good practices. So once again, congratulations. And also all participants in this webinar.
Gracias, estimado Israel. Israel es la persona también que nos va a ayudar en redactar el informe.
Israel is going to help us on work on the drafting, collecting all the recommendations. So Rodrigo, I think he wants to say something.
Se ha estado comentando sobre el cambio climático.
Yes, thank you very much. We have been talking about climate change and we do not know much of where it's headed. Now, there is, of course, the global warming. That's true, certainly. And drafts, for example, in the west of the United States, western area of the United States, that is also having an impact on Mexico, is just something that points at it what we know is that what we have in the atmosphere, the temperature is kept as constant. And then also the rainfall is constant at a worldwide level. So what is happening here is that it changes. It's just a spot where the rainfall comes is of course different. If it falls into the ocean, of course, they cannot be used by the humankind, and we will have desertification if not. But if it falls on continents and the intensity that we have not seen before, at beyond of record, beyond our records, and what we have seen in our dams, everything that we have designed is out of those parameters because rainfall either cease or increase, but in such a way that we have not figured it out. So if we have seen return for 200 years, of course, we'll have something that is unuseful for us. And if we have been doing that for a shorter period of time, then it's not going to be enough. That is exactly what is happening right now. And in the sector where we work, it is because we are working on those that are under our operations. So those that are defined for specific areas are not enough. So that means that we are working for that. And in the case of the extractive point, that is even more severe because there's not regulation capacity of rainfall, and then the impact is going to be higher if there is unforeseen spilloffs or if they're unexpected, of course. Now, in the case that we do not have those, then it's evident that we will have other issues. And as part of that, we should also bear in mind that many of those things were designed 20 or 10 years ago and that we are just using them right now. So the idea is that we have seen that they are more efficient and tailings are finer, which means that tailings are showing more issues, more problems. So that means that along with other things, we have to consider that precisely, as I was mentioning before, in our risk analysis, because it would help us to specify where we have certain issues or deficiencies to work on those. That's all. Those are the two comments that I wanted to mention. I think they are very interesting because we're talking about climate change and we do not know where it's headed.
Señor Rodrigo, muchísimas gracias por estas palabras.
Rodrigo, thank you very much for these additional comments.
Bueno, el equipo de sentidos como
Okay, our technical team, would you please enable or open the microphone and camera of Vicente Montoya? Would you please? Vicente also participated at the beginning in the design of our strategy. So if there's something that we need to add to today's conversation, we know that they can jump on on those comments too. What about that?
Sí, me gustaría aprovechar unos minutos para
I'd like to take advantage of a few minutes to explain our participants connected today, and we really appreciate their presence in this forum. So that they know that there are a series of activities after the forum that we're going to carry out. As you know, today is just the first webinar of a series of four webinars that are going to be part of this environmental sustainability forum in the extractive sector. So that you know, we're going, all the wealth of information that has been shared with you today on the part of the panel experts, we are going to summarize all this information all this important information in a report. And that's what we are going to be considering as the first process of the systematization of the best practices. political best practices and guidelines that have been shared in these 4 webinars. And we're going to summarize all this, and we're going to publish it in a report that is going to be published in the months coming after this event. And also to share with you that after this publication of this report, we are also going to create a work group for environmental sustainability at ministerial and national level with the 4 countries of the Pacific Alliance, where we are going to invite the different specialists from the corresponding ministries to this forum that are going to be the representatives of the Ministry of Environment, Mining, Energy, Education, External Affairs and Economy, to put together this work group where we're going to continue sharing information and to systematize, and we're going to do a whole and deep process of the systematization of the policies and best practices and orientations or guidelines that had been shared. And then finally, the third process or stage that where we're going to do this post-forum stage in the last year of the program of EPE. We're going to get to the training of the stakeholders at national level, and we're going to train them on the best practices so that we can support them, so that we can get to the implementation of this wealth of information that will have been shared in this forum after with the work group as well, and then also in the training at national level. So it was important to have the opportunity to share this so that you know all the follow-up of the stages that we're going to have after the forum. And I wanted to share it with the partners in the Pacific Alliance, and that we're going to publish this as well. And now I'd like to invite my dear colleague, Vicente Montoya, because he'd like to say some words about this process of systematization as our leader of monitoring and evaluation of the program EPA-PA. Thank you very much, Brigitte. I'd like to start by congratulating our speakers for their great presentations. These events allow us to be more aware of the environmental problems that we always talk about them, but we don't take actions on those problems. So it's worth mentioning what those problems are for each of the countries, and also, as you said, what are those experiences, positive experiences, and the best practices that are translated into concrete actions. In this webinar that has to do with the actions for the reduction of the environmental impact, put us to think in these 2 significant axes of the intervention in the countries: the measures for managing immediately the remedial actions. There are problems and there are things in the short term that we need to cover. And the political advisors play a significant role, not to just write the policies, but also to provide the funds to implement the actions, and so that they can turn into plans and projects and programs, larger programs. And so that's why it's so important that for that type of decisions and actions or funding, that would show the willingness of the states to solve these problems. That's why the experiences that you are sharing are an inspiration, and they're an example, and they set the path and to give recommendations to go beyond the speech and into action. Along those lines, on the one hand, we want to support in what we have left of this program, those types of reflections after this forum, so that we can identify that set of policies, specific policies that are still valid and that have been translated in guidelines, in standards and in plans for each country, and so that we can see what recommendations can be used to ensure a more and more successful implementation and more concrete. Small things that can contribute to this stage of the remediation, what to do right now. And at the same time, to be able to project ourselves in this other axis, which is prevention. This reduction of the environmental impact undoubtedly has a very large space for education, has a lot of room for education. How could we, through our institutes and universities, the technological universities involved, make sure that our students have these skills and these commitments and this attitude of an environmental citizen to provide an added value to their technical training. We don't just need professionals that know how to do the technical things in their specialty. They need to be committed to the reduction of the environmental impact with small gestures such as the reduction of plastic and to start measuring what you mentioned, the importance of the supervision, monitoring, what is the situation that we find, what tools are we going to use to make sure that our actions are contributing to improve what we have stated for ourselves. Those two big elements, the actions, the remedial actions in the short terms and the long-term actions that have to do with education, I think they're going to be the contributions that our program can contribute with, and also generating, besides this forum that has been opened up with this first webinar, to have new meetings. And that's why it's so important that besides the people that are here with us today, because of their personal interest to be part of these 4 days, and that are coming from the different parts of the country that are participating, that we can participate those ones that because of the roles, not just because of, not just out of curiosity, but that they have the responsibility to foster policies or that they are already implementing plans for reducing the environmental impact, and we can identify those people and we can meet again, and so that we can also we can make agreements and we can have challenges for the short term to say, for example, what are the changes that we could generate. So congratulations again. Everything that we're doing today is good. And I think that there are lots of people that mentioned forums and seminars and virtual get-togethers where they talk about this or similar topics. But the cultural change, the change in your mindset requires these types of spaces where we continue to understanding the size of this problem and that we continue to commit ourselves and that we can, with our countries, with our policy orientators, we can do more than just reflect upon this. Thank you very much, Vicente.
Ahora, tenemos la suerte.
Now we are very lucky to have a political authority, another political authority, such as Efraín Alfa Niño, who is the head of the Division of Coordination for Extractive Activities for the Economics Secretary from Mexico. His professional experience was in carbon mining, Rio Escondido. And he has experience in engineering, geological engineering, mechanical rock, cementology, geological exploration, exploitation of non-metal ores, characterization and interpretation of sites, geology, and evaluation of projects. So we, Efraín, welcome to this webinar.
Sí, muy buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. My name is Efraín Alba. I am Undersecretary of Economy. I work in the Secretary of Economy. I'm the head of the Division of Coordination of Extractive Activities. And it's a real pleasure to participate, but it's also a commitment to close this fourth or wrap up this forum of sustainability, environmental sustainability in the Pacific Alliance in Canada that is focused on best practices and policies in the extractive field. Mexico has had a past, as we all know, and it has a present, and we have a bulging future in mining, which is an extractive activity that has characterized by the amount of ore of great leveraging for the developing in the foundation of our current society, and how this is going to be recharged for as the pillar of our society, a society that is that wants to be founded in sustainability. And we have, and I'd like to clarify that as we've seen in this forum, the importance of sustainability, especially to emphasize the difference of sustainability. It is something that a lot of people doesn't perceive, and they use it as a synonym. But in this forum, we have to emphasize those differences, but mostly that the sustainability in the extractive field should not be a dream or something that is difficult to attain, but it should be a reality, tangible reality, and especially one of that needs to be demandable for all the governments that are dedicated to the extractive field. As I just mentioned, for us in our governmental parts, and especially with the responsibility that we have, it's very important to pour that message, and that message permeates to the common society so that they can see and understand that it's not necessary just mining is not just important, but it's important to understand all the different activities that are that surround it. But even more important is to say that the mining practices, the extractive mining practices from the past are going to remain in the past. Mining currently, and especially all the different actions that are carried out for extraction, are mandated under regulatory frameworks that are very demanding, and especially focus on, as I mentioned, the sustainability of our environment. And especially the best practices in mining are focused on, firstly, making sure to check what you have before you start with the different activities, to hire specialists that will allow us to have the least impact possible in the environment, and especially focus on the flora and fauna and the different amounts of waters that we have, underwater, underground water, and superficial water, and especially to avoid the damage to the population, the human population, and also flora and fauna, as I just mentioned. And to avoid that, say, for example, we're going to reforest, but we have to reforest with native forests that are part of the environment, and so that we can protect the fauna, which is local, the wildlife, and also to protect the local wildlife and also the migratory wildlife that are that are coming to these areas where we have these extractive actions. We have the different units of environmental management that where each company has, so that when you close the mine and when you close that area, you can give back the population an environment that is as least impacted as possible, but especially the protection of the flora and the fauna and of those areas, the wildlife. Those are commitments that have been acquired and that are between the companies and the government. And working with the classification and the UNC, where the different companies have commitments at international level. And that is going to help us in the governmental part with the transition of the fossil energy to renewable energy. That transition, that is the future, that we are already using it as a present in our different governments. And from here, congratulations to all the participants, and thank you very much for participating. Dear Efrain, thank you very much for your words. And now I'd like to invite my colleague that you saw earlier, Bridget. Bridget, who is the main, she's the official principal of the program, for the closing remarks and to remind you of the coming 3 webinars that we're going to have in the coming weeks. And with that, I'd like to say goodbye and thank you for your participation. Bridget, go ahead. These are my closing remarks for this first webinar, and then on behalf of the SECAN group. I'd like to thank all the speakers and all the authorities of the 4 countries of the Pacific Alliance for your excellent and enriching presentations of today that have contributed to the strengthening of the regional dialogue and international dialogue and the exchange of best practices and policies about sustainability, environmental sustainability in the extractive field. We'd like to thank all the participants that were connected throughout this session. We really appreciate your interest, your attention, and your time, especially your active participation with your questions through this session and during the Q&A section. So it's been a very successful first session where we have addressed the topic of specific actions for the reduction of the environmental impact in the extractive field with different points of view and experiences, successful experiences. We hope that you have enjoyed it and that it was an experience that contributes to our shared goals and that is going to open the door to new reflections. We have developed a satisfaction survey for panel A. It's very short and it's only going to take you about 5 minutes to complete it. We are sharing it now via email, and so you are going to receive it in either of the 3 languages, English, Spanish, or French. If you cannot do it right now in the panel, you can just do it once. We thank you in advance for your collaboration and support, and we also value your opinions and your comments, your feedback, because they will contribute to improve our events for the future. And now I'd like to remind you the dates and the times for the coming 3 sessions of the 4 webinars. And I confirm that you are going to receive automatically via email a new link for the connection for each of the coming webinars that is going to remind you of the coming sessions. The second webinar for the forum is going to be next Thursday, the 4th of November in the following times from 8 to 11 Mexican Standard Time, from 9 to 12 Colombia time in Peru, and from 11 to 2 to Chile time, and from 10 to 1 Ottawa time. And this webinar is going to focus on development of human capital with environmental perspective, addressing different subtopics such as the social perspective and globalization and environmental education. The contributions for the design of public policies, environmental public policies, and also the sustainable management of plastic. through education, information, and transformation, citizens transformation. We are also going to have the presence of experts of high profile and prestige, as well as political authorities, high level from the 4 countries of the Pacific Alliance and Canada, that they're going to share their knowledge and experience. The third webinar is going to be 11th of November, and is going to focus on the consultative processes and system of recognition of good environmental management. And finally, the last webinar is going to be on the 18th of November, where is going to be a participative forum with working tables by topic and by country in the interest group. We hope we can see you all on next Thursday. So have an excellent end of the day. It is going to be a pleasure to be part of the intersectorial meetings with you and share the best practices and policies in the Pacific Alliance and Canada.
Merci beaucoup à tous et à toutes pour votre participation aujourd'hui.